The departure board at Platform 9 of Toronto's Union Station had not updated in 40 minutes, and the snow outside the tall arched windows was the kind that came sideways. Maren Colville had been watching the board long enough to memorize the order of the other delayed trains. The 6:42 to Ottawa, the 7:15 to Windsor, and the 7 to Montreal, which was hers, which now showed a single blinking word in amber. Cancelled. She did not move at first. She was 31 years old, and she had learned, in those 31 years, that the first 30 seconds after bad news were not for doing anything. They were for absorbing. So she stood in the middle of the concourse with her one rolling bag and her good coat. The charcoal wool one she had bought second-hand and had dry cleaned twice since, and she absorbed it. Then she walked to the Via Rail desk. The agent was a tired man in his late 50s who had clearly been delivering bad news for the past hour and had stopped apologizing for it. The 7 to Montreal, Maren said. Cancelled. Storm system came in earlier than forecast. Next available departure is tomorrow at 6:15 a.m. My interview is at 9. He looked at her once briefly over the rim of his reading glasses. I can rebook you at no charge. Is there a connecting option tonight? Bus? Anything, he typed. He shook his head. Nothing moving tonight out of Union in that direction. Roads are closed on the 401 east of Kingston, a hotel voucher. He slid a printed card across the counter. The hotel logo on it was one she recognized from airport roadsides, the kind where the breakfast was pre-wrapped muffins and the sheets had the texture of paper towels. Maren looked at the card for a moment. She folded it into her coat pocket. Thank you, she said. She walked back to the main concourse, stood under the great vaulted ceiling with its pale stone arches, and thought about her mother, who had driven her to the train station that morning from the small house in Sudbury where Maren had grown up. Her mother, who had pressed a thermos of tea into her hands and said, "You've worked 8 years for this. You go, and you don't let anything stop you." The job was a grant writer position at the Rideau Children's Foundation in Montreal, the organization she had been researching and drafting proposals for in her spare time for the better part of 2 years, while working days at a non-profit in Toronto that paid her just enough to keep the lights on and not enough to keep the worry quiet. The interview was at 9 in the morning. Her bank account held $412. A hotel near the station and a cab to the Foundation's offices would eat nearly half of it. She would arrive at the interview in the same clothes she'd slept in. The voucher hotel was 40 minutes by cab. She would sit in the station. She had sat in worse places. She had grown up sitting in worse places. Across the concourse, in the row of wooden benches that ran along the south wall, a man in a dark navy jacket closed his phone and looked up at the departures board for a moment, then looked at her. His name was Thomas Haig. He was 36 years old. He had built, in the years since he sold his first company at 28, a mid-sized logistics firm that moved pharmaceutical supplies across eastern Canada, and a smaller organization, the kind that didn't appear in press releases, that funded literacy programs in rural school boards from Kenora to Antigonish. He had spent the last hour at Union Station waiting for a board member's flight to land, rerouting 2 phone calls, and doing what he had done in public spaces since he was a teenager, which was watch other people while appearing to look at nothing in particular. He had watched the agent shake his head at her. He had watched her fold the hotel card into her pocket without argument. He had watched her walk back out into the concourse and stand very still under the stone vaulting, the way a person stands when they are deciding whether to let the weight of something show on their face. She had not let it show. He was not a man who inserted himself into strangers' evenings. He kept his head down in public the way some people kept their voices low in churches, but there was something in the straightness of her shoulders, the kind of straightness that was not confidence so much as refusal, that he could not quite look away from. He stood up. He did not go to her first. He went to the Via Rail desk. "The next Montreal departure," he said to the agent. "Private car option if you have one." The agent blinked at him. "Sir, we don't, well. There's a chartered equipment run going out at 8:30 tonight. Storm clearance route via Kingston. It's not a passenger service, can it carry passengers? Technically, if. It would require a charter authorization and 2 passengers, Thomas said. Process it. I'll pay the charter fee." The agent looked at him for a long moment. He looked at the black card Thomas set quietly on the counter. He began to type. "One of the passengers," Thomas said, "is the woman in the charcoal coat who was just at this counter. I don't know her name. You do, from her booking. I'd like you to call it over the intercom and tell her Via Rail has found an emergency transfer option for tonight's Montreal passengers, and ask her to return to the desk. Don't mention a charter. Don't mention me." If she asks, you can say the option became available in the last few minutes. The agent looked at him. She has an interview at 9 in the morning, Thomas said. That's all I know about her situation. I'd like her to make it. The agent's expression shifted, not much, but slightly. He picked up the desk phone. Maren was reading the departure board again, calculating nothing in particular, when she heard her name over the station intercom. She turned and walked back to the Via Rail desk, with the particular attention of someone who had learned not to hope too quickly. Mrs. Colville, the agent said, there's been a development. A charter transfer out of Union tonight. Storm route to Montreal, departing at 8:30. We have 2 seats. Would you like one? She looked at him. What's the cost? Covered under the service disruption, he said, without quite meeting her eyes. She didn't move for a moment. She had learned, over years, the difference between something that was true and something that was almost true. This felt like the second kind. Is there another passenger on this charter, she said. The agent hesitated 1 beat too long. There is, she said. It wasn't a question. Who is it? He glanced toward the bench by the south wall. She turned. The man in the navy jacket was standing up. He was taller than she'd registered from across the concourse. He was perhaps mid-30s, dark-haired, with the kind of face that gave very little away and didn't seem to try. He walked toward her with the unhurried pace of someone who had already decided what they were going to say and was not nervous about saying it. Mrs. Colville, he said, I apologize for the indirect approach. I'm Thomas Haig. I chartered the transfer. There are 2 seats. You don't have to take one. If you'd rather not, I'll ask the agent to rebook you on the morning train at no cost to you, and we can both pretend this didn't happen. She looked at him, she looked at the agent, she looked back at him. Why? She said. He did not reach for a polished answer. She could see him consider one and set it aside. Because I watched you handle that desk with more composure than most people handle a delayed coffee order, and the agent just told you there was nothing available, and there was. I had access to something you didn't. That seemed like a correctable problem. You paid for a charter so a stranger could make a train. I paid for a charter so I could make a meeting tomorrow at 7. There were 2 seats. One was going empty. She studied him. That's a very tidy explanation. It's accurate, he said. What do you want in return? He met her eyes. Nothing. People who want nothing don't charter trains for strangers. I didn't say I want nothing from life, he said. I said I want nothing from you. There is a difference. He paused. My grandmother grew up in Cape Breton. She used to miss the ferry to the mainland twice a year, when the weather came in and she had somewhere to be. She told me once that the hardest part was not the missing. It was the standing there afterward, watching it go, knowing you'd done everything right and it still went without you. I've never been able to watch that particular scene play out without wanting to intervene. Maren was quiet for a moment. Around them, the station moved. A family with luggage, a porter with a cart, 2 teenagers in hockey jerseys arguing about something on a phone. You don't know anything about me, she said. I know you had an interview in Montreal at 9 in the morning. You told the agent. I know you said no to the hotel voucher, which means either the hotel was bad or the money was tight or both. I know you're still standing here instead of leaving, which means you're considering it. That's everything I know. She looked at him for a long moment. What kind of meeting do you have tomorrow? Board meeting for a foundation I sit on. Rideau area. She went very still. Which foundation, he told her. She felt something shift under her ribs. Not warmly, not yet, something more careful than warm. That's the Rideau Children's Foundation, she said. Yes, I'm interviewing there tomorrow at 9. He looked at her. Something crossed his face, not calculation. Surprise and then a kind of stillness that followed surprise when it was genuine. I don't sit on the hiring committee, he said. I'm on the capital board. Different meeting, different floor. You're on the foundations board. I am. And you want me to get on a train with you? I want you to get on a train so you make your interview, he said. If that interview is at the Rideau Foundation, that's a coincidence I didn't manufacture and would have told you immediately if I'd known. He reached into his jacket and took out a business card. He placed it on the counter between them. That's my name, the firm, and my direct line. You can call anyone at Rideau right now and confirm I have no involvement in staff hiring. You can sit in a completely separate car if the train has more than one. You can ignore me from here to Montreal. I will not be offended. The seat is yours if you want it. She picked up the card. She read it. She thought about her mother's voice that morning. She thought about the $412. She thought about the good coat she'd dry cleaned twice because first impressions were a form of argument she had learned to make carefully. One condition, she said. All right, you do not speak to anyone at Rideau about me, before, during, or after the interview. Not to recommend me. Not to mention my name, not to say you know me, agreed. I need that in writing before we board. He didn't hesitate. He took out his phone, opened an email and typed it in front of her. 4 sentences, plain and specific, and sent it to the address she gave him. Done, he said. Anything else? She thought for one more moment. She had been raised by a woman who believed that you could accept help without surrendering dignity. But only if you held both things in your hands at the same time and knew the difference between them. Yes, she said. If we end up in the same car, I choose where to sit. Fair, he said. The charter was a single VIA equipment car attached to a maintenance run, heated and lit, with 6 seats arranged in 2 rows. Maren chose the window on the left side, 3 rows from the front. Thomas sat 2 rows behind her without comment. The train left Union at 8:34, moving east through the city in the grey dark of the storm. The lights of the distillery district slid past the window, then the slow stretch of the DVP corridor, then the highway overpass with its amber signals blinking in the snow, each one a small, steady pulse in the white. She did not speak for the first 40 minutes. She opened her notebook, a soft navy cover, pages dense with handwriting and printed inserts and small yellow tabs, and she worked. He could see, from 2 rows back, the way she moved through the pages without hesitation. The way a person moved through something they know entirely. After a while, he opened his own laptop and returned to the board report he'd been drafting since noon. At the half-hour mark, the VIA attendant, a woman named Broussard, who seemed to regard the unusual circumstances of the run with complete professional equanimity, came through with a small cart. Coffee? Tea? Tea, Maren said without looking up. Mr. Haig? Coffee, please. Black. A few minutes later, from 2 rows back. I hope I haven't put you in a strange position. Maren looked up from her notebook. She turned in her seat slightly. You mean professionally? Yes. You've put me in a position I'll have to explain if anyone asks, she said. I'd rather have that problem than the alternative, which was explaining tomorrow morning why I missed the train. What will you say if they ask? The truth. I was stranded at Union. A stranger chartered a transfer. I took it. She paused. I documented it. The email. Yes. He nodded once. She watched him for a moment. Why did you really do it? He considered the question the way she had already noticed he considered things. Not performing thought, but actually doing it. I told you about my grandmother, he said. You told me a story about your grandmother. That's not the same as a reason. He almost smiled. He didn't. I grew up in a house where we didn't have enough, and my mother worked 2 jobs and still managed to be the person who noticed when the neighbors needed something. I've spent 15 years building things that make money. The only thing she ever asked was that I not forget to look up from it occasionally and notice who was standing still in a crowd that was moving. He looked at the window. I looked up tonight. Maren was quiet for a moment. My mother packed me tea this morning, she said, in a thermos. It's in my bag right now, and I haven't opened it because I didn't want to feel. She stopped. Homesick, he said. I was going to say sentimental. She paused, but yes. She opened her bag. She unscrewed the thermos. The smell of strong black tea and a faint trace of the wood-heated kitchen in Sudbury came out of it like a small, accurate ghost of the morning. She held it for a moment. My mother raised me in a house in Sudbury, she said. Just her. My father left when I was 9. She worked at the school board and cleaned offices on weekends, and she never once, not once, let me see her calculating whether we could afford something. She just arranged things so we could. She drank the tea. This job is for her as much as it is for me. She's never said that, and neither have I, but it's true. Thomas did not say anything for a moment. He looked at his laptop screen. He closed it. My father stayed, he said. He just wasn't someone you could lean on. My mother learned that early, and she made sure I understood that reliability was not a given. It was a choice you made every day. He paused. I've built every company I've ever had on that one idea. She looked at him. That's a large thing to say to a stranger on a train. The lights are low and it's a long way to Montreal, he said. I find trains do this to people. She looked out the window. The storm had eased slightly. The highway lights were fewer now, the dark between the small towns longer. Somewhere east of Belleville, the landscape opened up into the flat expanse of the Canadian Shield's southern edge, pale and still under the snow. Tell me about the foundation, she said. Not the official version. What it actually does, he told her. Not the press release version, not the donor-facing summary. He told her about the rural school boards in northern Ontario, where the foundation had quietly funded reading programs for 7 years, about the single community in Timmins where literacy rates had shifted measurably over a decade, about the meeting he'd once had with a retired teacher in Chapleau, who had told him that the program had given her the first group of graduating readers she'd had in 11 years of teaching. She listened without interrupting. When he was done, she said, "The proposal I submitted last month cited that Timmins data." He looked at her. "Your application is the one I read last week," he said, "in the Capital Board briefing package." He paused. I didn't connect the name. She held her tea with both hands. "Is that a problem?" "No," he said after a moment. "It's a coincidence that keeps deepening, which is either extraordinary luck or the kind of thing that seems significant in retrospect. I'm choosing not to find it significant until I've finished the interview." "That's very sensible," he said. "I'm a sensible person. I can see that." She did not look away. "Your proposal review, did it go well?" "I'm not allowed to comment on specific applications." "I know. I'm asking about the review generally." "The committee found the work in the package strong," he said carefully. "I'll say that, and nothing more." She nodded. She returned to her notebook. They did not speak again for almost an hour. The train moved through the dark in the way that long trains in winter move. Steadily, with the slight sway that becomes after a while indistinguishable from the natural rhythm of breathing. She was writing. He was reading. At some point, around midnight, the attendant Mrs. Broussard came through again with a small insulated bag. "Sandwiches," she said. "Station packed them for the crew. There are extras if you want." Thomas looked toward Maren's row. "Would you like one?" "What kind?" "Ham and cheddar, I think. Or egg salad." "Ham and cheddar," she said. "Thank you." He brought it to her himself rather than handing it back through the attendant. He set it on the seat beside her. He was returning to his row when she said, "You can sit here if you want. I'm not going to pretend we don't know each other's names anymore." He sat down across the aisle. They ate their sandwiches without ceremony in the low light of the rail car, the windows black against the winter outside, the only sound the track and the engine, and the occasional small creak of the car's frame. "Why grant writing?" he said. "Because I'm good at arguing for things I believe in," she said. "And I believe in this one. I've been drafting shadow proposals for Rideau for 18 months. Not because anyone asked. Because the programs they fund are the kind that don't show immediate results. They show up 7 years later in a reading test. And 7 years later is when the funders have moved on and the programs lose their money." She looked at the window. "I know how to write the argument for the 7-year version." "Not many people do." Thomas was quiet for a moment. "The position has been open for 6 months," he said. "They've interviewed 11 people." "I know. You're the 12th. I know that too. Why do you think they haven't filled it?" She looked at him steadily. "Because the person who does this job well has to love the work more than the job, and that's a hard thing to hire for." He held his coffee cup in both hands and looked at her in the way she had noticed. The way that was not quite admiring but was something close to recognizing. "Yes," he said. "It is." At some point after 1 in the morning, the car quieted fully. Mrs. Broussard had returned to the crew end. The rhythm of the track had gentled. Maren was still at her notebook, working with the slightly slowed hand of someone past the second wind. Thomas had his jacket off, his sleeves rolled, and was reading something on his tablet. She said, without looking up from her notes, "Your grandmother, did she ever make the mainland on time?" He looked up. "Eventually she married the ferry operator." Maren stopped writing. "That is not a true story," she said. "It is absolutely a true story. His name was Clifford. He ran the Englishtown ferry for 31 years. They were married for 44. She looked at him. He had the expression of a man telling a true story who is aware of how improbable it sounds. "That's," she started. "Yes," he said. She returned to her notebook. She was smiling, faintly, in a way she did not try to stop. The train arrived at Montreal's Central Station at 4:17 in the morning. The platform was nearly empty, lit by the amber overhead lamps and the faint reflected glow of the city on the low cloud above. Maren stood, put on her coat, and lifted her bag. Thomas stood and put on his jacket. On the platform, they walked side by side in the way two people walk when they have talked in the dark for several hours and are not quite strangers anymore, but have not yet agreed on what they are. "The foundation offices are on Sherbrooke," he said. 20 minutes from here by cab. I know where they are. There's a hotel on Peel that's reasonable and close. I've booked the hotel by the station," she said. "I booked it from the train." "Ah, I've been managing my own logistics for a while," she said, not unkindly. "I know," he said. "I wasn't suggesting otherwise." She stopped walking. He stopped too and turned toward her. "Mr. Haig," she said, "I'm going to ask you one more time, cleanly. Do you intend to say anything to anyone at Rideau about tonight? About this train? About me before or after 9 o'clock tomorrow morning?" "No, not to the hiring committee, not to your chair, not at your board meeting in passing. Not a word." She studied his face. She had decided sometime around midnight the particular quality of a person who had never needed to perform honesty, because honesty was simply the more efficient option for him. "All right," she said. She held out her hand. He shook it. His hand was warm from the coffee cup. "Good luck tomorrow," he said. "Thank you for the train," she said. She walked toward the station exit. He watched her go. Not the way a man watches a woman he has catalogued, but the way a person watches someone disappear into a city and finds themselves wondering, quietly, which street they'll take. The cab she had arranged was waiting at the lower exit. She got in. She gave the hotel address. She put her bag on her knees and looked out at Montreal coming past the windows in the dark. The old stone of the downtown, the long illuminated sweep of Dorchester, the streetlights making small amber pools in the snow that had fallen here too, lighter than Toronto's, more restrained. She thought about Thomas Haig on the train, talking about his mother. She thought about the way he had said, "Reliability is a choice you make every day," with the flatness of someone who had thought about it for years before saying it out loud. She thought about the Timmins teacher and the 11-year wait and the reading test. She thought about whether it was possible to be simultaneously composed and undone by a night, and decided it was, and that she was. She did not let herself think about the interview yet. The interview was in 4.5 hours. There was a hotel and a shower and 2 hours of sleep between her and it. She could think about it then. She thought, instead, about the ferry operator named Clifford, who had run the English town crossing for 31 years, and about a woman from Cape Breton who had missed the boat twice a year until she didn't. The Rideau Children's Foundation occupied the 3rd and 4th floors of a heritage building on Sherbrooke West, the kind of building that had been a private bank once, or a gentleman's club, and had since been repurposed into something with better intentions and the same solid bones. Maren arrived at 8:40 in a clean white blouse she had pressed on the hotel's ironing board at 6:15, and a blazer that had spent the night unfolded at the top of her bag on purpose so the creases would fall out. She had slept 90 minutes. She had eaten a granola bar and the rest of her mother's tea. She gave her name to the receptionist and sat with her notebook on her knees and her hands folded the way her mother had taught her, not to appear calm, but because it was the posture of someone who had decided to be ready. The interview was conducted by a panel of 3. The executive director, a woman named Dr. Halvorsen, the program lead, a man named Mr. Tran, and a senior grants officer named Miss Ferris-Boyd, who had the careful look of someone who had read Maren's proposals twice and wanted to see whether the person matched the work. There was no photograph on a tablet. There was no unexpected complication. For the first 45 minutes, it was a good interview. She answered clinical questions and strategic ones, and one hypothetical scenario about a major donor whose priorities had shifted mid-grant cycle. She answered them the way she had learned to answer hard questions, plainly, specifically, without performance. At the 48-minute mark, Dr. Halvorsen set down her pen and said, "I want to ask you something that's not in the standard framework. You've been writing shadow proposals for our programs for the better part of 2 years. Without being asked, without being paid, I'd like to know why." Maren looked at her. "Because the 7-year result is real," she said. "I've seen it. My mother's school board in Sudbury piloted a version of your early literacy model in 2016. I watched it over the following 7 years. I know what it does. The problem is that no one in funding cycles thinks in 7 years. They think in fiscal years. My job, if you hire me, is to build the argument that makes them think longer. I've been drafting that argument because I needed to know I could make it before I asked you to trust me with it." The room was quiet. Miss Ferris-Boyd wrote something on her notepad. "Mrs. Colville," said Mr. Tran, "one of your proposal drafts, the rural engagement model, cited longitudinal data from a Timmins cohort. Where did you get that data?" "The Foundation's own published impact summary from 2021. It's available on your site. Most grant writers don't read past the executive summary. I read the appendices." He looked at Dr. Halvorsen. Dr. Halvorsen looked at Maren with the expression of someone arriving at a conclusion they had been approaching for some time. The interview ran to 1 hour and 50 minutes. They did not have a clock in the room, but Maren counted the questions, 37 of them, and answered each one with the same plainness she used for everything else, which was the plainness of someone who had decided years ago that the most efficient use of intelligence was clarity. At the end, Dr. Halvorsen walked her to the elevator and said they would call by end of day. Her handshake was the kind that meant something. Maren walked out of the building and turned left on Sherbrooke and walked for a long time. She walked past the Musée des Beaux-Arts without seeing it, past a florist with yellow tulips in the window. She stopped at those and stood for a moment looking at them, and then walked on, because she was not ready to buy them yet, because yellow was for thank you, and she had not received the thing she was trying to thank for yet. She sat eventually on a bench in a small square near Guy Concordia and did not move for 30 minutes. She thought about the train. She thought about Mrs. Broussard's sandwiches and the low amber light and the track rhythm that had felt by 2 in the morning like the breathing of something very large and very settled. She thought about what Thomas Haig had said about looking up. She did not think about whether the interview had gone well. She had done everything she could do. The rest was not hers to manage. At 2:11 in the afternoon, her phone rang. Dr. Halvorsen. She answered on the second ring. She said yes. She asked the start date and the terms and the formal next steps with the same practical attention she brought to everything. And when she ended the call, she sat on the bench for another 10 minutes and let it settle into her the way water settles into stone. Slowly, completely changing the shape of things from the inside. Then she went back to the florist on Sherbrooke and bought the yellow tulips. She thought about calling her mother first. She would call her mother. But there was one other thing she needed to do, and she needed to do it while she still knew why she was doing it. She found the Foundation's building directory on her phone. Thomas Haig's Capital Board meeting had been listed in the briefing materials she'd seen in her prep research. 4th floor, room 4B, 2 o'clock. It was 2:34. She went back to the building on Sherbrooke. She gave her name at reception. She asked for the Capital Board meeting room. The receptionist looked at her. "That meeting is still in session, Miss Colville." "I know. Please tell Mr. Haig that the woman from Union Station is here, and that I'd like a moment of his time when the meeting concludes." The receptionist made the call. 3 minutes later, the elevator opened, and Thomas Haig walked out, still in his board meeting jacket, with the focused, careful expression of a man who had left a room mid-discussion and was doing the math on whether he should have. He saw her face. He let out one quiet breath. "You got it," he said. "I got it." He stood in the lobby holding a folio in one hand and looking at her the way she had noticed him look at things that surprised him genuinely, without immediately deciding what to do about it. "I wanted to tell you in person," she said, "before I called my mother. I don't entirely know why. I think I do," he said. She held the tulips in their paper sleeve. "These are for you. Yellow is for thank you." She paused. "I was raised to give the real version, not the polite version." He looked at the tulips. He took them from her with both hands. "Thank you," he said. "The train made the difference," she said. "I want you to know that I know that." "You made the difference," he said. "The train just got you there." She looked at him. "That's a very tidy answer." "It's accurate," he said. The lobby was quiet around them. The soft hum of the building's heat, the distant sound of the elevator returning to the upper floors, the pale winter light coming through the glass doors from Sherbrooke. "I have to call my mother," Maren said. "Of course." She did not move toward the door. "Mr. Haig," she said, "I'm going to start this job in 3 weeks. I'd like to know, before I do, whether there's a version of tonight that doesn't end with you being someone I have to carefully not know in a professional context." He was quiet for a moment. He had, she had noticed, the particular kind of patience that came not from waiting, but from having already thought something through. "I'm not on the hiring committee," he said. "I'm on the Capital Board. Different meeting, different floor. I'm aware. The Foundation's conflict policy covers direct reporting lines and grant review committees. It doesn't cover Capital Board members and program staff. I've read it," she said. "I read it this morning at the hotel." He almost smiled. He didn't, quite. "Then you know the answer to your question." She looked at him. "Say it anyway." He looked at the tulips in his hands. He looked at her. "There's a cafe on Crescent Street that stays open until 10, he said. "If you're willing to have a cup of tea with someone who chartered a train to Montreal and is now holding flowers he didn't buy, I'd like to hear about the interview. The real version, not the polite one." "I want coffee," she said. "You said tea on the train." "I said tea on the train. We are in a different city now. I'm allowed to want different things." He did look at her properly then, with the full attention of someone who had been careful all evening not to look too long, and had decided, in the lobby of a heritage building on Sherbrooke West with yellow tulips in his hands, that he did not need to be careful anymore. "Coffee," he said. Then she called her mother from the sidewalk outside, standing in the cold with the pale Montreal sky above her, and the sound of the street around her, and the warmth of the good coat on her shoulders. Her mother's voice came through the phone, small and clear, and immediately tearful in the way that her mother's voice was always immediately tearful when something good happened, because Maren Colville had spent 22 years being careful with her hopes, and had never quite learned how to receive the good ones without her whole face giving way. Maren stood on Sherbrooke Street and listened to her mother cry happy tears. and told her the details slowly and carefully, and with the fullness they deserved. When she ended the call, Thomas was waiting at a slight distance, not hovering, not impatient. The way a person waits, who has no claim on your time and knows it and is comfortable with that knowledge. She walked toward him. She cried, Maren said. That sounds right, he said. They walked together to the cafe on Crescent, two ordinary people in winter coats, the city moving around them with the mild indifference that cities extend to small private happinesses. The snow had stopped. The streets were clear. The lights of the storefronts were warm and soft in the early dark. 8 months later, on a Tuesday evening in January, the departures board at Union Station's Platform 9 was lit and current and working perfectly, which was not, Thomas reflected, the way this particular story had been supposed to go. He was sitting on the wooden bench by the south wall with 2 coffees in a cardboard tray and Maren's bag on the seat beside his, because she was at the counter confirming their tickets for the 7 to Montreal. Where they were spending the weekend? Because her mother was visiting from Sudbury and wanted to see the city. And also, though he had not told Maren this, because he had called Maren Colville 3 weeks ago and asked her a question, and Vivienne had said yes and then cried into what he gathered was a substantial amount of kitchen paper, and they had agreed not to tell Maren until Saturday evening, which was now 2 days away, at a particular restaurant she had mentioned once in the context of someday. He had the ring in his inside jacket pocket. He had a small yellow tulip in the paper bag with the coffees, wrapped in a square of wax paper, because he had been raised by a woman who believed that the gesture mattered, and that yellow was for thank you. Maren came back from the counter and sat down and picked up her coffee and did not immediately notice the paper bag. She was telling him something about a grant report that had come in just before she'd left the office, and she had the small bright focus that she always had when she was working through something that mattered. He listened. He handed her the bag. She looked inside. She looked at him. It's not the season for tulips, she said. I called ahead. She took the flower out and held it in both hands and looked at it, and then looked at him with the expression he had come to know over 8 months, the one that was not soft, exactly, but was the thing that lived just behind steadiness, when steadiness finally permitted itself to rest. Yellow, she said. Yellow, he said. The boarding announcement came over the speakers. They picked up their bags. They walked toward the platform side by side, 2 people carrying their own luggage, the sound of the station moving around them, the way all large indoor spaces move, with the ambient warmth of people going somewhere. On Platform 9, she stopped for a moment and looked at the board. 7 to Montreal. On time. Last time we stood here, she said. The board said cancelled. It did, he said. She looked at him. I keep thinking about the version of this where I took the hotel voucher and went to bed. Don't, he said. Why not? Because that version doesn't have you in Montreal in the morning. She was quiet for a moment. It doesn't have you either. He took her hand. It was the second time he had done this. The first had been on Crescent Street in January, outside the cafe, when it was very cold and he had not asked, just done it, and she had not let go. She did not let go now. They walked down the platform toward the waiting train. The conductor at the door nodded them aboard. The car was warm and well lit, the seats wide, the windows showing the station's lit vaults above the platform roof. She sat down by the window. He sat beside her. The train began to move. She looked out as the platform lights started sliding past, and then the dark of the tunnel, and then the city opening up around them. The grid of lights, the long slope of the West End, the skyline going amber and grey in the January dusk. Tea? He said. She turned from the window. It's a 2-hour train, she said. You know the answer. He did. He had known it for a while now. He ordered 2 coffees from the cart when it came through, and she went back to her notebook, and he went back to his reading, and the train moved east through the dark, the way it always had. Steadily, with the long sway of something going exactly where it means to go,